The bell above the door chimed with the particular sharpness that always meant trouble. Serene Hollis looked up from the ledger she'd been pretending to balance, her ink-stained fingers pausing mid-calculation. Rain hammered against the shop windows, blurring the gray afternoon into watercolor smudges, and the man who'd just entered brought the storm with him. Water dripped from his greatcoat onto the worn floorboards. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his expression suggested the weather was a personal affront. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of sharp-angled face that probably made silly debutantes swoon. Serene was not a silly debutante. She was a bookseller's niece with rent, due in 3 days, and a shipment of philosophical texts that absolutely no one in London seemed interested in purchasing. The man surveyed the shop with cool gray eyes, cataloging the cluttered shelves, the precarious stacks of volumes on every available surface, the cat sleeping on the poetry section. His gaze finally landed on Serene, and something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or judgment. "Is this Hollis and Company?" His voice was low, precise, the kind of voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. Serene gestured broadly at the sign painted on the window, visible even through the rain. "Unless the letters have rearranged themselves since this morning, yes." The man's eyebrow rose fractionally. Apparently, he wasn't accustomed to sarcasm from shopgirls. Good. He could add it to his list of grievances about the day. He moved deeper into the shop, water still trailing behind him like a loyal hound. Serene watched him examine the shelves with the intensity of someone searching for something specific. He pulled down a volume, examined its spine, and replaced it with visible distaste. "You're looking for something particular," Serene said. It wasn't a question. "Montaigne's Essays, the 1811 translation if you have it." Serene rose from her stool, smoothing down her practical gray dress. "We don't. You didn't even check. I don't need to check. I know every book in this shop, and we sold our last Montaigne 3 weeks ago to a gentleman who actually said please." She met his stare directly. "There's a concept you might explore sometime." For a long moment, silence stretched between them like a held breath. The cat on the poetry section yawned. Rain continued its assault on the windows. The man's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his demeanor, something that looked almost like interest. "You're remarkably forthright," he said finally. "I'm remarkably busy." Was there something else, or are you simply here to drip on my floorboards and complain about our inventory? Any sensible shopkeeper would have been horrified by her rudeness. Her uncle would have heart palpitations if he could hear her. But there was something about this man's bearing, his obvious expectation that the world would arrange itself to his satisfaction, that made Serene want to be as unaccommodating as humanly possible. The man actually laughed. It was a short sound, rusty, like something that hadn't been used in some time. "You don't know who I am." "Am I supposed to?" "Most people do." "Then perhaps most people have time to memorize faces of self-important strangers. I have inventory to manage." She returned to her stool, deliberately turning her attention back to the ledger. The numbers still didn't balance. They hadn't balanced in months. Her uncle's failing health and failing business were racing each other toward disaster, and no amount of creative arithmetic could change that fact. The man didn't leave. She could feel him watching her, a weight of attention that made the back of her neck prickle. When she finally looked up, exasperated, she found him examining a display of astronomical texts near the window. "These are organized incorrectly," he announced. "You have Herschel next to Copernicus, but Galileo is 3 shelves away. Any logical arrangement would group them by era, not alphabet." Any logical customer would understand that alphabetical organization allows people to find what they're actually looking for, rather than what some arbitrary historical framework suggests they should want. The historical framework provides context. Context is for scholars. Commerce is for everyone else. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time, Seren noticed his clothes beneath the wet greatcoat. Fine wool, expertly tailored, with silver buttons that probably cost more than a month's rent. His boots were ruined by mud, but they'd been expensive before the weather had its way with them. This wasn't just a gentleman. This was someone wealthy, someone powerful, someone who moved through the world with the assumption that doors would open before him. He should have intimidated her. Instead, she felt her spine straighten with familiar stubbornness. "You disagree with everything I say," he observed. "You've been wrong about everything you've said. The Montaigne, we genuinely don't have it. That's not disagreement. That's inventory." Another almost smile tugged at his lips. He was handsome when he wasn't being imperious, Seren realized with irritation. Not that it mattered. The shop bell chimed again, and an elderly man bustled in, shaking rain from his umbrella with the practiced efficiency of a long-time Londoner. He stopped short when he saw the man by the astronomy section. "Your Grace." The words came out strangled. "I had no idea you'd be visiting the shop yourself. Had I known, I would have—" "Uncle Alistair." Seren's voice cut through his stammering. "You know this gentleman?" Her uncle's face had gone pale as parchment. He was looking at Seren with the expression of a man watching someone juggle lit torches near a powder keg. "This is the Duke of Northmere, Seren. We discussed this. The letter that arrived last week." The Duke of Northmere. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. The Duke of Northmere, who held the deed to this building. The Duke of Northmere, to whom her uncle owed 18 months of unpaid rent. The Duke of Northmere, who had the power to throw them into the street with a single word. The Duke of Northmere, whom she had just called self-important and told to explore the concept of saying, "Please." Seren's stomach plummeted, but she kept her expression carefully neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. "Your Grace," she said, and the title tasted like ash on her tongue. "I apologize for not recognizing you." "Do you?" His gray eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. "Apologize, I mean. Or are you simply saying what you believe you're supposed to say?" It was a trap. She could see it clearly, the way any honest answer would incriminate her, while dishonesty would prove her a coward. Her uncle made a small, despairing sound. Seren lifted her chin. "I apologize for my lack of recognition. I stand by everything else." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the Duke of Northmere smiled, a real smile this time, one that transformed his severe features into something almost approachable. "Good," he said, and the single word carried more weight than seemed possible. He turned to her uncle, and his voice shifted back to crisp authority. "Mr. Hollis, I came to discuss your situation in person, but I find the circumstances have become considerably more interesting than I anticipated." He glanced back at Seren, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Considerably more interesting indeed. The conversation that followed took place in her uncle's cramped office behind the shop, and Seren was not invited to attend. She spent an agonizing hour reorganizing shelves that didn't need reorganizing, straining to hear anything through the thin walls. The murmur of voices rose and fell, punctuated by her uncle's occasional distressed exclamations. When the door finally opened, Alistair Hollis emerged, looking like a man who'd been granted a stay of execution, but wasn't entirely certain he wanted it. The Duke followed, his greatcoat now dry enough to reveal its impeccable cut, his expression once again unreadable. "Seren." Her uncle's voice carried the particular strain of someone delivering news they desperately hoped would be received well. "His Grace has made us a proposition." "Has he?" "Don't use that tone, child. He's being extraordinarily generous." The Duke moved past her uncle to stand near the shop's front window, positioning himself against the gray afternoon light in a way that made his features difficult to read. Calculated, Seren realized. Everything about this man was calculated. Your uncle's debts are substantial, the Duke said without preamble. 18 months of unpaid rent, plus the loan he took against the business 2 years ago. The numbers are not in his favor. I'm aware of our financial situation. Are you aware that I could have the both of you removed from this property by the end of the week? Seren's hands clenched at her sides, but she kept her voice steady. I'm aware that you have the power to do many things, Your Grace. That doesn't mean you should. Her uncle made another despairing sound. The Duke simply watched her with those gray eyes, assessing. My estate in Northumberland houses one of the largest private libraries in England, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. 12,000 volumes, accumulated over 6 generations. My father had plans to catalog and organize the collection properly. Those plans were never completed. Seren waited, uncertain where this was leading. I require someone with expertise in rare books, organizational systems, and the stamina to work through years of accumulated disorder. Someone who isn't afraid to voice their opinions when they disagree with mine. The implication landed like a physical blow. You want me to come to Northumberland? I want you to spend 6 months at Ashford Hall as the curator of my library. In exchange, I will forgive your uncle's debts in their entirety. The shop will be his, free and clear. He can rebuild without the weight of what he owes. Seren stared at him. Behind her, she could hear her uncle's breathing, quick and shallow with barely suppressed hope. That's absurd, she said. You could hire any scholar in England to organize your library. You don't need a bookseller's niece from a failing shop in London. I could hire any scholar in England, the Duke agreed. But scholars bore me. They agree with everything I say, and trip over themselves to flatter. I find I prefer honest disagreement. You prefer being told you're wrong about Montaigne? I prefer being treated like a man rather than a title. Something flickered in his expression, there and gone. You appear to have a talent for that. The words hung between them, charged with meaning Seren couldn't quite interpret. She thought of the 18 months of unpaid rent, the worry lines carved deep into her uncle's face, the letter from the physician that had arrived last month, warning of Alistair's weakening heart and the need for rest he couldn't afford to take. She thought of Northumberland, wild and remote, hundreds of miles from everything she knew. She thought of the Duke's smile when she'd refused to truly apologize. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens after 6 months? The debts remain forgiven regardless. You return to London with references that will open any door you choose, scholarly or commercial. Your uncle's health will have had time to recover without financial strain, destroying what remains of it. He knew about Alistair's health. Of course he did. A man like this would know everything, would research everything, and would enter every negotiation holding all the cards. And if I refuse? The Duke's expression didn't change, but something cooled in his gaze. Then I'm forced to proceed with more traditional methods of debt collection. I take no pleasure in it. But business is business. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the casual certainty of someone who had never been told no. Seren wanted to refuse just to prove she could, but when she looked at her uncle, at the hope warring with fear on his weathered face, she knew there was only one answer she could give. 6 months, she said. I organize your library. My uncle keeps the shop, and I want my terms in writing before I set foot outside London. The Duke nodded, unsurprised, as if he'd already known what her answer would be. Naturally. I'll have my solicitor draw up the documents. And I want a stipend for my time, separate from the debt forgiveness. I won't work for free just because you've decided to forgive what we owe. This seemed to catch him off guard. His eyebrows rose, and that almost smile tugged at his lips again. You're negotiating with me. You set the terms of this arrangement. I'm simply clarifying them. Her uncle looked like he might faint. The Duke looked impossibly pleased. £20 a month, he said, plus room and board at Ashford Hall. 30. I know what librarians charge, and I know what rare book expertise is worth. 25. And I'll ensure you have access to any volumes you wish to read during your tenure, including those not available to the general public. Seren considered. £25 a month was more than she'd ever earned. Combined with room and board, she could save nearly all of it. When she returned to London, she'd have options, choices, and a future that didn't depend on the precarious survival of a failing shop. 25, she agreed, and I want Sundays free for correspondence and personal time. Done. The Duke extended his hand. Do we have an arrangement, Miss Hollis? Seren looked at his outstretched hand, elegant and powerful, and representing everything she'd been raised to mistrust about aristocracy. She thought of her mother's stories about noble families, about the cruelty that lived beneath their polished surfaces. She thought of her father, dead these 7 years, who'd always said that titles meant nothing and character meant everything. She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, sending an unexpected shiver along her spine. We have an arrangement, Your Grace. His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. I leave for Northumberland in 3 days. A carriage will collect you from this address at dawn. I suggest you pack warmly. The North is unforgiving to those unprepared for its temperament. He released her hand and collected his greatcoat, moving toward the door with the fluid grace of someone who never questioned whether the world would accommodate his passage. At the threshold, he paused. Miss Hollis, one more thing. Yes? When we're not in public company, you may continue to call me wrong about things. I find I've developed an unexpected appreciation for it. Then he was gone, the bell chiming his departure, leaving Seren standing in the middle of the shop she'd just traded 6 months of her life to save, wondering what exactly she'd agreed to. Her uncle collapsed into the nearest chair. Child, what have you done? Seren didn't have an answer. She stared at the rain-streaked window where the Duke had stood and felt the first flutter of something she refused to name. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for a life she couldn't imagine, and the unsettling certainty that the Duke of Northmere was not done surprising her. The journey north took 4 days, each one carrying Seren further from everything familiar. London's crowded streets gave way to rolling farmland, then to forests that seemed to stretch forever, and finally to the wild, wind-swept moors of Northumberland. The landscape here was stark and beautiful, all heather and stone, and enormous skies that made her feel impossibly small. The Duke's carriage was more comfortable than any vehicle Seren had ever occupied. Velvet cushions, a small brazier for warmth, curtains that blocked the worst of the winter wind. She spent most of the journey reading the books she'd packed, trying not to think about what awaited her at the end. When Ashford Hall finally appeared on the horizon, Seren's breath caught in her throat. The house rose from the moorland like something from a Gothic novel. All gray stone and towering windows, chimneys spiraling toward the low-hanging clouds. It was massive, far larger than she'd imagined, sprawling across the landscape with the casual dominance of something that had stood for centuries and intended to stand for centuries more. This was where she would live for the next 6 months. The thought was absurd, impossible. Girls like Seren didn't live in places like this. They cleaned places like this, perhaps, served in them. But they didn't take up residence as honored guests with stipends and Sundays free for correspondence. The carriage pulled through iron gates and along a gravel drive lined with bare-limbed oaks. Servants emerged from the main entrance before the wheels had fully stopped, moving with the practiced efficiency of a well-run household. A footman opened the carriage door and offered his hand with grave courtesy. Miss Hollis, welcome to Ashford Hall. Seren stepped out into air that smelled of wood smoke and rain and something wild she couldn't name. The wind whipped at her traveling cloak, and she pulled it tighter around herself as she stared up at the looming facade. An older woman in severe black appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a ruthless arrangement, her posture the kind that came from decades of managing grand houses. "Miss Hollis, I am Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms. His Grace has instructed that you have everything you require for your comfort." Seren followed her through the main entrance and into a world she'd only read about in novels. The great hall soared upward, walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to track her movement. Crystal chandeliers caught the gray winter light and scattered it across marble floors. Fires blazed in hearths large enough to stand in, filling the air with welcome warmth. "The family wing is to the east," Mrs. Pemberton explained as they climbed a sweeping staircase. "You'll be housed in the guest wing, west of the main library. His Grace felt proximity to your work would be most practical." That was thoughtful of him. Mrs. Pemberton glanced back, her expression impossible to read. "His Grace is very particular about practical arrangements." They walked through corridors lined with more paintings, past doors that led to rooms Seren could only glimpse in passing. A music room with a grand piano, a sitting room in shades of blue, a gallery filled with sculpture and shadow. Finally, Mrs. Pemberton stopped before a door of polished oak. "Your chambers, Miss Hollis." The room that awaited her was larger than her uncle's entire flat above the bookshop. Cream-colored walls, a four-poster bed hung with sage-green curtains, a writing desk positioned near windows that overlooked the moorland stretching toward the horizon. A separate dressing room was visible through an open doorway, and beyond that, what appeared to be a private sitting area. Seren stood in the center of the bedroom, turning slowly to take it all in. "The library is through the connecting passage." Mrs. Pemberton gestured toward a door Seren hadn't noticed. "His Grace thought you might appreciate the direct access." "A connecting passage to the library." "Indeed. Is something wrong, Miss Hollis?" "No, nothing's wrong. This is simply—" Seren searched for adequate words and found none. "More than I expected." Something like approval flickered across Mrs. Pemberton's severe features. "His Grace can be surprising that way. Dinner is served at 7 in the small dining room. His Grace dines alone when in residence, but he's requested you join the family table during your tenure. Lady Tansy will be delighted to have female company." Lady Tansy. Seren remembered the Duke mentioning a sister in one of his letters about travel arrangements. She'd pictured someone imperious, someone cut from the same controlled cloth as her brother. "A maid will attend you shortly to help unpack," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "Is there anything you require immediately?" "No, thank you. This is more than sufficient." The housekeeper nodded and departed, leaving Seren alone in her borrowed splendor. She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. The moors rolled away beneath a sky thick with clouds, beautiful and desolate. In the distance, she could see what might be the sea, or might simply be more endless gray. Behind her, a fire crackled in a hearth she hadn't noticed being lit. The bed looked soft enough to swallow her whole. Every surface gleamed with the particular shine that came from servants and money and generations of accumulated care. This wasn't her world. She was a visitor here, a temporary arrangement, a curiosity the Duke had collected because she'd been rude to him in a bookshop. The thought should have been grounding. Instead, it made her feel strangely hollow. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Before she could respond, it burst open to reveal a young woman with wild auburn curls and the kind of smile that could light bonfires. "You're her." The words tumbled out in a rush. "You're the bookseller who told Theron he was wrong about Montaigne. Mrs. Pemberton said you'd arrived and I simply couldn't wait. I'm Tansy. Please tell me everything." Seren blinked. "I'm sorry." "Told whom?" "Theron. My brother. The Duke." Tansy bounced into the room with the energy of a summer storm, seemingly unaware that she'd just rendered the formal introduction process entirely irrelevant. He came back from London in the strangest mood. Wouldn't tell me anything. Just kept muttering about organizational systems and honesty. I knew something interesting had happened. Your brother mentioned me. Mentioned? He practically wouldn't stop talking about you. Well, for Theron, that means he said your name twice and allowed himself to smile once. But that's essentially a soliloquy, coming from him. Seren didn't know what to do with this information. The controlled, calculating Duke she'd met in the bookshop didn't seem like someone who would discuss a confrontational stranger with his sister. Tansy settled onto the edge of the bed, arranging her skirts with careless grace. You must understand, Theron hasn't smiled properly since Father died. He just works endlessly and broods magnificently and refuses to let anyone close enough to help. The fact that you made him smile at all is practically miraculous. I wasn't trying to make him smile. I was trying to manage a difficult customer. Tansy's grin widened. And that's exactly why it worked. Everyone else falls over themselves to please him. You told him where to find better Montaigne translations, and implied his organizational theories were nonsense. That's not exactly what... Don't ruin it. The version I have is much more entertaining. Tansy stood abruptly, grabbing Seren's hand. Come on, I'll show you the library before dinner. You won't believe the state of it. Father was a collector, not an organizer. It's absolute chaos. Seren let herself be pulled toward the connecting door, Tansy's enthusiasm sweeping away her reservations like leaves before a gale. The passage beyond was narrow and dim, lit by small windows set into the stone walls. Their footsteps echoed against the flagstones. And then Tansy pushed open a final door, and Seren stepped into her new domain. The library of Ashford Hall was magnificent. It was also, Tansy was right, absolute chaos. Books covered every surface, shelved and stacked, and piled in arrangements that seemed to follow no logic whatsoever. Volumes lay open on tables, as if their last reader had simply wandered away mid-sentence. Ladders leaned against shelves 3 stories high. The scent of old paper and leather and dust filled the air like incense. Seren's pulse quickened, not with fear, with hunger. 6 months, she breathed. He expects me to organize this in 6 months? Father collected books the way some men collect horses or mistresses, compulsively, and without any thought to practical consequences. Tansy's voice was fond. Theron used to spend hours in here with him when we were children. I think that's partly why he hasn't been able to face the project himself. Grief, Serene realized. The library wasn't just disorganized. It was a mausoleum of his father's passion, too painful to properly address. She was here to lay a ghost to rest. The weight of that understanding settled over her shoulders, heavier than she'd anticipated. This wasn't just about debts and arrangements and stubborn negotiations. This was about a man who'd lost his father and couldn't bring himself to touch the books they'd once shared. Dinner at 7, Tansy reminded her, already moving toward the door. Don't be late. Grandmother is dining with us tonight, and she does so hate tardiness. Grandmother? But Tansy was gone, leaving Serene alone in the cathedral of neglected words. She turned slowly, taking in the scope of what she'd agreed to. 12,000 volumes. 6 months. And somewhere in this house, a duke who'd brought her here because she'd treated him like a man instead of a title. Serene had the unsettling feeling that organizing books would be the simplest part of what awaited her. The small dining room was anything but small by Serene's standards. A table that could seat 12 dominated the space, set with crystal and silver that caught the candlelight like captured stars. Portraits of Ashford ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her every movement with what felt like aristocratic disapproval. Serene had changed into her best dress, a simple gown of deep blue wool that had seemed perfectly respectable in London. Here, surrounded by centuries of accumulated grandeur, it felt woefully inadequate. Tansy was already seated when Seren arrived, bouncing slightly with barely contained energy. The Duke stood by the fireplace, his profile illuminated by dancing flames. He'd changed from his traveling clothes into evening wear that made him look even more intimidating than he had in the bookshop. More distant. More ducal. But it was the woman seated at the head of the table who commanded Seren's attention. The Dowager Duchess of Northmere was ancient in the way that mountains are ancient, weathered, but immovable. Her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to achieve. Her black silk gown was adorned with jet beads that clicked softly when she moved. Her eyes, the same gray as her grandson's, held the sharpness of someone who had spent 8 decades observing human nature and finding it largely wanting. So, the single word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. "This is the shopkeeper's niece," Seren curtsied, grateful for years of her mother's instruction. "Your Grace, thank you for allowing me to join the family table." I allowed nothing. My grandson informed me of arrangements already made. The Dowager's gaze swept over Seren with the thoroughness of a customs inspector. "Sit. I dislike craning my neck." Seren sat in the chair a footman pulled out for her, acutely aware of every inadequacy in her posture, her dress, her very existence. Across the table, Tansy offered an encouraging smile. The Duke remained by the fireplace, watching the exchange with an expression Seren couldn't read. Soup was served. The Dowager lifted her spoon with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. "You run a bookshop," she said. It was not a question. "I help my uncle run one, Your Grace. Hollis and Company in London. A failing bookshop, from what I understand." Heat crept up Seren's neck, but she kept her voice steady. "The economy has not been kind to specialty booksellers. My uncle's health has complicated matters further. And yet my grandson saw fit to forgive considerable debts in exchange for your presence here." The Dowager's spoon paused midway to her lips. One might wonder what qualities a shopkeeper's niece possesses that would merit such generosity. "Grandmother," the Duke's voice carried a warning edge. "I'm simply curious, Theron. Surely the girl can speak for herself, or is that not among her advertised talents?" Seren set down her own spoon, meeting the Dowager's steel-gray gaze directly. "I possess knowledge of rare books and organizational systems. I'm not afraid of hard work or difficult projects, and I apparently possess the quality of treating your grandson like a human being rather than a title, which seems to be in short supply among his usual acquaintances." Silence crashed through the room. Tansy's eyes went wide. The Duke made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The Dowager's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those ancient eyes. "You're impertinent," the Dowager observed. "I'm honest, Your Grace. I've found the two are often confused. By people too foolish to know the difference, perhaps." The Dowager resumed eating, her movements unhurried. "Tell me about your family. Your real family, not the uncle whose debts apparently purchased your services." Seren hesitated only briefly. Lies would be discovered and used against her. Truth, at least, could not be weaponized in the same way. "My father was a scholar who became a bookseller when academic positions proved scarce. He died 7 years ago of a fever he might have survived if we'd been able to afford a proper physician. My mother passed 2 years later, of grief as much as illness. I have no other family save my uncle. He took me in when I had nowhere else to go." She delivered the facts without self-pity, the way she'd learned to discuss them over years of practice. "And your education. My father taught me himself. Latin, Greek, French, German. Philosophy, history, literature. He believed education should not be limited by circumstances of birth. A radical notion. A practical one. Knowledge has no respect for bloodlines." The Dowager set down her spoon and studied Seren with renewed intensity. "You remind me of someone. Your Grace? Myself. At your age, before I learned that directness is a luxury only the powerful can truly afford. The dowager lifted her wine glass, taking a deliberate sip. My grandson tells me you'll be organizing the library. Yes, Your Grace. My son spent 40 years collecting those books. They were his passion, his obsession, his escape from a world that demanded too much of him. The dowager's voice remained even, but something shifted beneath the surface. Theron hasn't set foot in that room since the funeral. Seren glanced toward the fireplace. The Duke's jaw had tightened, his gaze fixed on the flames. I understand, Your Grace. Do you? The dowager's laugh was brittle. I doubt that very much, but you'll learn. This house is full of ghosts, Miss Hollis. Some of them wear faces we recognize. Others lurk in the pages of books we can't bring ourselves to open. The footman arrived with the next course, breaking the moment's intensity. Conversation shifted to safer topics: the weather, local news, and Tansy's upcoming social obligations. But Seren felt the dowager's attention like a weight, assessing and measuring with every passing minute. After dinner, when Tansy had excused herself and the Duke had retreated to his study, the dowager stopped Seren in the hallway with a hand on her arm. A word, Miss Hollis. Seren turned, bracing herself for whatever came next. The dowager's face was unreadable in the corridor's dim light. My grandson is not a cruel man, but he is a broken one. His father's death destroyed something in him that he refuses to acknowledge. He works endlessly, manages the estates perfectly, fulfills every obligation of his title. But he is not present. He is merely performing the role. Why are you telling me this, Your Grace? Because you asked no questions about him. Everyone who enters this house asks questions, angles for information, tries to position themselves for advantage. You've shown no interest in his fortune, his title, or his matrimonial availability. I'm here to organize books, Your Grace, nothing more. Perhaps. The dowager's grip tightened briefly before releasing. Or perhaps you'll prove to be exactly what he needs, someone who sees the man instead of the Duke. Her eyes hardened. But know this: if you hurt him, if you exploit his grief for your own gain, I will ensure you never work in any respectable establishment again. My reach extends far beyond Northumberland. I have no intention of hurting anyone, Your Grace. Good. See that you don't. The dowager turned away, then paused. Breakfast is served at 8. The library connects to the main house through 3 separate passages. I suggest you learn them all. This house is larger than it appears, and getting lost is easier than you might imagine. She disappeared into the shadows, leaving Seren alone with the painted eyes of generations, a warning and a welcome wrapped in the same breath. Seren returned to her rooms with the unsettling certainty that she'd just passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. The first week at Ashford Hall established a rhythm Serene hadn't anticipated. She woke early, took breakfast in her rooms while reviewing the previous day's progress, then entered the library through the connecting passage to continue the monumental task of cataloging 12,000 volumes. The Duke was notably absent. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, crossing the great hall with papers in hand, riding out across the moors on a black horse that matched his mood, conferring with estate managers in tones too low to overhear. But he never entered the library, never sought her out for conversation, never acknowledged her presence beyond the most formal courtesies when their paths crossed at dinner. It shouldn't have bothered her. She was here to work, not to socialize with aristocracy. The arrangement was clear, the expectations explicit. And yet, she found herself listening for his footsteps in the corridors, noticing when his study light burned late into the night, wondering what thoughts occupied a mind so determined to remain inaccessible. On the 8th day, he finally appeared. Seren was perched on one of the rolling ladders, examining a high shelf of astronomical texts that appeared to have been organized by someone with no understanding of either alphabetical order or chronological sequence. She heard the door open, but assumed it was one of the servants who occasionally brought tea or inquired about meals. "You've made progress." The voice startled her enough that she nearly lost her grip on the ladder. She looked down to find the Duke standing in the center of the library, his gray eyes tracking her work across the towering shelves. "Your Grace." She descended carefully, acutely aware of the dust on her dress and the smudge of dirt she could feel on her cheek. "I didn't expect you. I've been avoiding this room," he said it flatly, without apology. "I thought I should stop." Seren gestured at the organized sections she'd completed. One wall now arranged by subject, then by author, each shelf labeled with small cards in her careful handwriting. "Your father collected extensively. The astronomy section alone contains over 300 volumes, some quite rare." The Duke moved toward the shelves she indicated, his fingers trailing across spines, with the familiarity of long acquaintance. He loved the stars, said they reminded him that human problems were insignificant compared to the vastness of the universe. That sounds like a philosophy worth adopting. Does it? His laugh was short, bitter. "I found human problems quite significant enough, regardless of what the stars suggest." Seren watched him examine the books she'd organized, his expression shifting through emotions too complex to name. Grief, certainly, but also something that looked like guilt. "You were close to him," she said quietly. "Not a question. I was never here enough to be close to him." The Duke pulled down a volume bound in blue leather, holding it like something fragile. "He wanted me to help with this library, you know. For years, he asked me to spend summers sorting through the collection with him. I always had other obligations. Parliamentary duties, estate matters, important things that seemed so urgent at the time. And now? Now he's dead, and a stranger is organizing the books we should have sorted together." He replaced the volume with careful precision. "I don't resent you for it, Miss Hollis. I resent myself." Seren considered her response carefully. Platitudes would insult them both. Sympathy might be rejected. She chose honesty instead. "When my father died, I spent months being furious with him for leaving us, for getting sick, for giving up, for not fighting harder. It was easier than being sad." The Duke turned to look at her, something shifting in his expression. "I told myself the anger was justified," Seren continued. "He should have taken better care of himself, should have saved more money, should have prepared us for life without him. And then one day, I realized I wasn't angry at him at all. I was angry at myself, for all the conversations we didn't have, all the questions I didn't ask, all the time I wasted assuming there would always be more time." "How did you move past it?" "I haven't entirely. I just learned to carry it differently." She met his gaze directly. "Grief isn't something you finish. It's something you learn to live alongside." The silence that followed was different from previous silences between them. Less guarded, more honest. The Duke moved to a nearby table where Seren had been stacking volumes that needed repair. He picked up a small book bound in worn green leather, its spine cracked and pages yellowed with age. "This was mine," he said softly. "A book of myths my father read to me when I was a child. I thought it had been lost. I found it wedged behind the geography section. Someone must have shelved it incorrectly decades ago." He opened the cover, and Seren saw an inscription in faded ink. "For Theron, who asked more questions than any child should reasonably ask. May you never stop wondering. Father." When he looked up, his eyes were bright with emotion. He was clearly fighting to control. "Keep it," Seren said impulsively. "It shouldn't be shelved with the general collection. It belongs with you. Thank you." The words came out rough, uneven. "For finding it. For being here. For—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I'm not accustomed to thanking people." "I've noticed." That earned her a startled laugh, more genuine than any she'd heard from him before. "You really don't treat me like a duke, do you? You really don't act like one when we're alone." He studied her for a long moment, the green book still clutched in his hands. I think that might be why I brought you here, not just for the library. For this. For someone who sees through the performance. Serene's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice light. I thought you brought me here because I was rude about Montaigne. That too. His almost smile appeared, softening the severe lines of his face. You should know, Miss Hollis, that I don't regret the arrangement. Whatever my grandmother may have implied, she implied quite a lot. She always does. He set the green book aside with obvious reluctance. I should let you return to work, but perhaps... He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Perhaps I might join you sometimes, not to interfere, just to be present. I'd like that, Your Grace. Theron. The name slipped out like a confession. When we're alone. My name is Theron. Serene felt the significance of the offering settle over her like silk. Theron, she repeated softly. Then you should call me Serene. His smile this time was real, transforming his severe features into something almost beautiful. Until tomorrow, Serene. He left through the connecting passage, taking the green book with him. Serene watched him go, her pulse racing with an emotion she was afraid to examine too closely. After that first visit, he returned often, sometimes for mere minutes, standing silently among the shelves while she worked. Sometimes for hours, helping her sort through particularly challenging sections while sharing stories about his father, about the books they'd discussed, about the man Theron had been before grief had hollowed him out. He never touched her, never said anything inappropriate. But each conversation peeled back another layer, revealing the person beneath the title. And Serene began to understand just how dangerous this arrangement had become. 3 weeks into her tenure at Ashford Hall, Serene learned that Northumberland society was considerably more formal than she'd imagined. The Winterbourne Assembly, Tansy announced, bursting into the library with her characteristic disregard for doors or privacy. It's the event of the season. Everyone attends. Absolutely everyone. Serene looked up from the philosophy section she'd been reorganizing. When you say everyone, I mean every family of consequence within 50 miles. The Havershams, the Blackwoods, the Carstairs. Lady Elspeth Whitmore will be there. Tansy's voice dropped meaningfully on the last name. She's been angling for Theron's attention for 3 seasons now. That sounds like his concern, not mine. It's everyone's concern. She's dreadful. All simpering smiles and strategic feinting. Last summer, she pretended to turn her ankle just so Theron would have to catch her. And did he? He let his valet handle it. I've never seen anyone so offended by competent medical assistance. Tansy grinned, perching on the edge of the table where Serene had been working. You have to come to the assembly. Serene shook her head. I'm here to organize books, not attend social events. You're here as our guest. Grandmother has already informed the family that you'll be attending as my companion for the evening. Tansy's grin turned conspiratorial. She wants to see how you handle society. Consider it another test. I've already passed her test. You passed the dinner test. The assembly is entirely different. More witnesses, higher stakes, considerably more dancing. Serene's stomach tightened at the mention of dancing. She could manage the steps. Her father had insisted she learn, claiming it was part of a complete education. But she'd never danced at an actual ball. The village assemblies of her youth hardly counted. I don't have anything appropriate to wear. Already handled. Grandmother sent to Newcastle for a dressmaker. You're being fitted tomorrow. Tansy bounced off the table. It's going to be wonderful. You'll see. The dress that arrived 3 days later was more beautiful than anything Serene had ever owned. Deep emerald silk that caught the light like captured forest, with subtle gold embroidery along the bodice and sleeves. When she put it on, with Alice's help, she'd been assigned a maid, another luxury she couldn't quite accept. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. "You look magnificent," Tansy declared, appearing in the doorway in pale rose silk. Theron is going to forget how to speak. "I'm attending as your companion, not your brother's. Details," Tansy waved dismissively. "Come on, the carriages are waiting." The Winterborn Assembly was held in a grand hall that had apparently hosted such events for over a century. Chandeliers blazed with hundreds of candles. Musicians played from a raised gallery. Lords and ladies in jewels and finery circulated through the crowd, their conversations a constant hum beneath the music. Seren felt exposed the moment she entered. Heads turned. Whispers began. She could see the calculations happening behind polite smiles. Who was this unknown woman in emerald silk? And why was she accompanying the Ashford family? Tansy squeezed her hand. "Ignore them. They always gossip about newcomers." The Duke appeared beside them, resplendent in dark formal wear that made his gray eyes appear almost silver. He surveyed the room with the controlled assessment Seren had come to recognize, then turned to her with an expression that made her breath catch. "You look—" He stopped, seeming to search for appropriate words. "The dress suits you. High praise, Your Grace." "Theron," he corrected quietly, too low for others to hear. "Remember." Before she could respond, an older woman descended upon them with the determined grace of a ship under full sail. She was handsome in a preserved way, her blonde hair artfully arranged, and her sapphire necklace probably worth more than the entire Hollis bookshop. "Your Grace," she curtsied with practiced elegance. "How wonderful to see you at the assembly, and this must be the young lady we've heard so much about." "Lady Whitmore." The Duke's voice cooled several degrees. "May I present Miss Seren Hollis, who is organizing my family's library. Miss Hollis, this is Lady Whitmore and her daughter, Lady Elspeth." Lady Elspeth emerged from behind her mother like a portrait come to life. Golden curls, porcelain skin, a gown of ice blue silk that probably cost more than Seren would earn in a year. Her smile was perfect and perfectly empty. "Miss Hollis, how fascinating that you've taken up employment with the family." The emphasis on employment was deliberate. "I didn't realize librarians were invited to assemblies." "Miss Hollis is our guest, not our employee," the Duke said flatly, "a distinction I'm certain you can appreciate." Lady Elspeth's smile didn't waver, but something sharpened behind her eyes. "Of course. How progressive." The orchestra began a new piece, and Lady Whitmore's attention shifted to the dance floor. "Your Grace, surely you'll lead the first set. Elspeth has been so looking forward to it." The trap was elegantly laid. Refusing would be openly rude. Accepting would give Lady Elspeth exactly what she wanted. The Duke glanced at Seren, something flickering in his expression. Then he turned back to the Whitmores, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid I've already promised the first dance to Miss Hollis, perhaps later in the evening." Serene's heart stopped. Lady Elspeth's perfect composure cracked, just for a moment. Her mother's smile became fixed. "How unexpected," Lady Whitmore managed. "We'll look forward to later, then." They withdrew, and Seren found herself being led toward the dance floor on the Duke's arm, her pulse hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "I don't recall being asked," she murmured as they took their positions. "Would you have said yes if I had?" "Possibly, though I might have warned you that my dancing is more theoretical than practical. Then we'll make a spectacle together." The music began, and he drew her into the first steps. "At least you won't bore me with simpering and strategy." His hand was warm at her waist, his grip on her fingers firm but gentle. Seren focused on the steps, on the music, on anything except the fact that half the room was watching them with undisguised curiosity. "Everyone is staring," she said quietly. "Let them. They're always staring. At you, not at unknown librarians who've somehow ended up dancing with dukes. You're not unknown anymore. His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. "After tonight, everyone in Northumberland will know your name." The dance carried them across the floor, turning and stepping in patterns. Seren's body remembered even when her mind forgot. The Duke was an excellent dancer, guiding her through difficult passages with subtle pressures of his hands. "You're better than you claimed," he observed. "You're worse at compliments than you realize." His laugh was low, genuine. "I'm terrible at compliments. I'm terrible at most social niceties. I've spent years perfecting the appearance of charm without any of its substance." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." The music shifted, slowing into something more intimate. His hand tightened at her waist. "I'm not exhausted when I'm with you." Serene's breath caught. "Theron, don't." His voice was rough. "Don't tell me this is inappropriate or impossible or any of the other words people use to avoid feeling things. I've been feeling nothing for 2 years. Let me feel this." The music swelled toward its conclusion. Around them, other dancers moved in their own orbits, oblivious to the conversation happening at the center of the floor. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Seren whispered. "I know. I'm here to organize your library, that's all." "I know that, too." "Then why are you looking at me like—" The music ended. Applause scattered through the hall. The Duke stepped back, releasing her with visible reluctance. "Like what, Miss Hollis?" His voice had returned to its formal register, but his eyes burned with something that made her knees weak. Before she could answer, Lady Elspeth appeared at his elbow, her smile sharp as glass. "Your Grace, I believe you mentioned the possibility of a later dance." The interruption shattered whatever had been building between them. The Duke's expression cooled, the mask of social propriety settling back into place. "Of course, Lady Elspeth, if you'll excuse me, Miss Hollis." He led Lady Elspeth away, and Seren was left standing at the edge of the dance floor, her pulse racing, surrounded by whispers she couldn't quite hear. Tansy materialized beside her, pressing a glass of champagne into her hand. "Well?" she said, her eyes sparkling with barely contained delight. That was certainly something. Seren drained the champagne in a single swallow. Something indeed. And she had no idea what to do about it. The remainder of the assembly passed in a blur of faces and names Seren couldn't retain. She danced twice more, once with a kindly older gentleman who talked only of horses, once with Tansy's friend Lord Pemberton, who seemed genuinely interested in her library work. But her attention kept drifting to the Duke, watching him navigate the social waters with practiced ease, his expression revealing nothing. Lady Elspeth remained close to him throughout the evening, her hand finding his arm at every opportunity, her laughter ringing out with theatrical regularity. They made a striking pair, the dark, brooding Duke and the golden, glittering lady, a perfect match by every standard that mattered to society. Seren retreated to a small alcove near the refreshment tables, hoping to gather her scattered thoughts. The champagne had left her head buzzing, and the evening's events had left her heart in turmoil. She didn't belong here. The emerald dress was borrowed confidence. The dance with the Duke was borrowed time. When the 6 months ended, she would return to London, to the bookshop, to a life that had nothing to do with assemblies and aristocrats. "Hiding, Miss Hollis?" The voice came from behind her, sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. Seren turned to find Lady Elspeth approaching, her ice blue gown catching the candlelight, her smile not reaching her eyes. Taking a moment to rest, Seren replied evenly, "The evening has been eventful." "Indeed it has." Lady Elspeth positioned herself to block Seren's exit from the alcove, her posture that of a predator cornering prey. "You've caused quite a stir. The mysterious librarian who danced with the Duke before any proper lady could claim his attention. I wasn't aware there was a prescribed order." "There's always an order, Miss Hollis. Those of us born to this world understand it instinctively. Those who aren't—" She let the implication hang. "Well, they must learn the hard way." Seren kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. "Is there something specific you wish to discuss, Lady Elspeth?" "Only to offer friendly advice, woman to woman." Lady Elspeth's smile sharpened. "His Grace has a reputation for taking up causes. Stray dogs, failing tenants, charitable projects that catch his attention. He devotes himself completely for a time, then moves on to the next worthy endeavor." "You're suggesting I'm a charitable project?" "I'm suggesting you're a distraction, a temporary novelty that will lose its appeal once the library is organized, and he's reminded of his actual obligations." Lady Elspeth leaned closer, her voice dropping. "His grandmother has already begun correspondence with my mother regarding a formal arrangement. The announcement will be made by the end of the season." The words landed like stones in Serene's stomach. "I wish you both happiness," she managed. "How gracious." Lady Elspeth's laugh was crystalline and cruel. "But we both know you don't mean it. I saw how you looked at him during that dance. I saw how he looked at you." Her smile vanished entirely. "It won't last. It can't last. You're a bookseller's niece with no fortune, no family, and no place in his world. When the novelty fades, he'll remember what's expected of him, and you'll return to whatever provincial insignificance you emerged from." Seren's hands trembled at her sides, but she refused to look away. "Are you quite finished, Lady Elspeth?" "Nearly. One more thing." Lady Elspeth reached out and adjusted the sleeve of Seren's dress with false solicitude. "Borrowed silk and dancing lessons don't change what you are. Beneath the pretty dress, you're still just the help. Remember that, the next time you're tempted to forget your place." She swept away without waiting for a response, leaving Seren alone in the alcove with burning cheeks and stinging eyes. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. The worst part was the truth buried within it. Seren was a distraction, a novelty, a temporary arrangement that would end in 3 months, leaving her exactly where she'd started, while the Duke married someone suitable and forgot she'd ever organized his books. The emerald dress suddenly felt like a costume. The champagne soured in her stomach. She found Tansy and pleaded exhaustion, arranged for an early carriage home, and spent the journey back to Ashford Hall staring out the window at the dark moorland, refusing to let herself cry. When she finally reached her rooms, she changed out of the borrowed finery with shaking hands and climbed into bed without bothering to call for Alice. Sleep didn't come for hours, and when it did, she dreamed of dancing with a duke who eventually turned away to take Lady Elspeth's hand instead, leaving Seren alone on an empty floor while the music played on without her. 3 days after the assembly, Seren had successfully avoided both the Duke and any conversation about the evening's events. She buried herself in the library, attacking the natural philosophy section with a ferocity that reduced centuries of accumulated chaos to orderly rows of labeled shelves. Work was safe. Work had clear parameters. Work didn't make her feel things she had no right to feel. The connecting door opened without warning on the 4th morning. "You're avoiding me." The Duke stood in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, his dark hair windswept from whatever morning exercise had occupied him. He looked tired. The shadows beneath his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well either. "I've been working, Your Grace." "Your Grace." He moved into the library, closing the door behind him. "We're back to formalities then." Seren continued shelving volumes without looking at him. "I thought it best to maintain appropriate boundaries." "Appropriate boundaries." He laughed without humor. "You mean Lady Elspeth got to you?" Her hand stilled. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean, I saw her corner you at the assembly. I meant to intervene, but my grandmother waylaid me with introductions, and by the time I escaped, you'd already left." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing of consequence." "Seren." Her name in his voice made her chest ache. "Please, don't lie to me." She set down the book she'd been holding and finally turned to face him. She reminded me of facts I should never have forgotten. I'm here temporarily. I'm staff, whatever polite fiction suggests otherwise. And you have obligations that don't include dancing with librarians, or looking at them. Like what? Like they matter. The silence that followed was heavy with everything unsaid. The Duke crossed the remaining distance between them, close enough that she could smell horse and leather, and the cedar and rain scent that seemed to cling to him always. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made breathing difficult. You matter, he said quietly. You matter more than I know how to explain. When I'm with you, I'm not performing. I'm not calculating every word for political advantage. I'm just present. Alive in a way I haven't been since... He stopped, jaw tightening. Since your father died, Seren finished softly. Yes. The word came out rough, almost broken. You see me, Seren. Not the title, not the obligations, not the performance everyone else requires. Just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is? That doesn't change the facts. Lady Elspeth said your grandmother is arranging. My grandmother is always arranging things. That doesn't mean I comply. His hands rose to cup her face, tilting it upward until their eyes met. I don't want Lady Elspeth. I don't want anyone my grandmother selects. I want... Don't. Serene's voice cracked. Don't say it. Because if you say it, I'll believe it. And then when this ends, why does it have to end? Because I'm nobody. Because this is borrowed. All of it. Because people like me don't get to keep people like you. People like you. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, gentle as whispered prayers. You mean people who are brilliant and honest and brave? People who tell dukes they're wrong about organizational systems? People who see grief and don't flinch from it? I mean people without fortune, or family, or any claim to your world. Then I'll change the world. He said it simply, as if toppling centuries of social expectation were a minor inconvenience. Or I'll leave it. Build a new one where you're not required to have 16 quartering of nobility to matter. Seren's laugh was wet with unshed tears. You can't just leave your world. Watch me. And then he kissed her. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a declaration, his mouth claiming hers with a desperation that stole her breath. Serene's hands found his lapels, gripping the fine wool as if he might disappear. He pulled her closer, one hand sliding into her hair, the other pressing against the small of her back. She should stop this, should remember all the reasons it couldn't work, all the obstacles standing between them. But his kiss tasted like possibility, and she'd been starving for possibility her entire life. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, his forehead rested against hers. Tell me to stop, he breathed. If you don't want this, tell me now, and I'll never mention it again. I want this. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. I want you. I just don't know how to have you without losing myself in the process. Then we figure it out together. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I'm not proposing we announce an engagement tomorrow. I'm not asking you to abandon your work or your independence. I'm asking you to let me love you while we determine what that means. Love. The word hung between them, terrifying and electric. Yes, love. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. I'm not very good at it. I've spent 2 years avoiding feelings entirely, but you've made that impossible. So here I am, making a mess of a confession in the middle of my dead father's library. Seren laughed despite herself, the tension cracking like ice in spring. It's not the worst confession I've ever heard. There have been worse? Jonathan Blackmore told me he loved me behind the butcher shop when I was 15. He also loved 3 other girls that same week. I'll endeavor to be more exclusive. His arms tightened around her. I mean it, Seren. I don't know what this looks like or how we navigate it. But I know I don't want to go back to not feeling anything. And I know you're the reason I feel again. She kissed him this time, pouring into it everything she couldn't say. The fear, the hope, the desperate wanting she'd been trying to suppress since that first dance. When they separated, the library felt different. The afternoon light slanting through windows seemed warmer. The dust motes dancing in the air seemed almost festive. "My grandmother is going to be furious," the Duke observed. "Lady Elspeth is going to be worse. Then we'll face them together." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Tomorrow. Tonight. Can we simply exist? Without titles or obligations or other people's expectations?" Seren nodded, her heart so full it ached. "Tonight," she agreed. "Tomorrow, we face everything else." But tomorrow, she would learn, had plans of its own. The storm broke 3 days later. Seren had woken to pale morning light, still wrapped in the cautious joy of new love. The Duke, Theron, had been careful to maintain propriety in public, but their private moments had become treasured islands of honesty. Conversations over breakfast before the household stirred. Stolen kisses in the library's shadowed corners. Evening walks on the moors where no one could observe them. It couldn't last. She'd known that. But she'd allowed herself to hope anyway. The Dowager summoned them both to the morning room at precisely 9 o'clock. She was not alone. Lady Whitmore sat beside her, resplendent in violet silk, her expression one of barely concealed triumph. Lady Elspeth stood by the window, her posture perfect, and her smile razor-sharp. "Sit," the Dowager commanded. Seren sat. The Duke remained standing, positioning himself between her chair and the assembled women like a shield. "I had hoped," the Dowager began, "that this situation would resolve itself naturally, that the novelty would fade, and proper judgment would reassert itself. I see I was overly optimistic." "Grandmother, do not interrupt me, Theron." The Dowager's voice cracked like a whip. "Lady Whitmore has informed me that you were seen yesterday, walking on the moors with Miss Hollis, alone, without chaperone, in what was described as an attitude of considerable intimacy." Seren's stomach dropped. They'd been careful. They'd thought they'd been careful. "What I do on my own land is my concern," the Duke said flatly. "When it affects your family's honor, it becomes everyone's concern." The Dowager turned her sharp gaze to Serene. "Miss Hollis, I warned you what would happen if you exploited my grandson's vulnerabilities." "I haven't exploited anything, Your Grace." "No?" Lady Whitmore leaned forward, her voice poisonously sweet. "You arrive from nowhere, insinuate yourself into the household, manipulate a grieving man's emotions, and position yourself to become a duchess. That sounds rather like exploitation to me." "Mother." Lady Elspeth's protest was token at best. "The facts are clear." The Dowager's voice was ice. "You came here to organize a library. Instead, you've created a scandal that will follow this family for years." "There is no scandal," the Duke interrupted, "unless you create one by making accusations in front of witnesses who will carry tales to every drawing room in Northumberland." "The scandal already exists." Lady Whitmore produced a letter from her reticule. "This arrived this morning. Apparently, someone at the Assembly wrote to London with questions about Miss Hollis's background. The response has been illuminating." Serene's blood turned to ice. "Her uncle's debts extend beyond the simple rent the Duke forgave," Lady Whitmore continued, consulting the letter with theatrical deliberation. "There are gambling debts, loans from disreputable sources. The entire family is one step from debtor's prison." "That's not," Serene started. "And most interestingly," Lady Whitmore's smile sharpened, "the shop apparently served as a location for receiving stolen goods on at least 2 occasions. Nothing was ever proven, but the magistrate's records are quite detailed." "That was a misunderstanding." Seren's voice shook. "A customer brought in books that later turned out to be stolen from an estate sale. We returned them immediately. No charges were filed." because your uncle cooperated with the investigation. But the association remains. Lady Whitmore set down the letter. Is this truly the family you wish to align yourself with, Your Grace? A shopkeeper's niece with a disgraced uncle drowning in debt? The Duke's jaw tightened. These accusations are irrelevant to— They are entirely relevant. The Dowager's voice cut through his protest. Marriage to Miss Hollis would destroy your political standing. The reformers you've been courting in Parliament would abandon you. The traditional families would close their doors. You would become a laughingstock. I don't care about— You should care. The Dowager stood, her full height still impressive despite her years. You are the Duke of Northmere. 12,000 people depend on your estates for their livelihoods. Your decisions affect not only yourself, but everyone who looks to this family for leadership. Is your infatuation with this girl worth destroying everything your father built? The mention of his father hit like a physical blow. Serene saw the Duke flinch, saw the crack appear in his defenses. Your Grace, Lady Whitmore said smoothly, surely you can see that the kindest thing for everyone would be for Miss Hollis to return to London. Her work here can be completed by a professional cataloger. The debts can remain forgiven. We're not monsters. But this association must end before it destroys you both. Seren waited for the Duke to argue, to fight, to say something that would make this bearable. But he was staring at his grandmother with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, doubt. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should discuss this privately. The words shattered something in Serene's chest. I think, she heard herself say, Lady Whitmore is right. Every head turned toward her. Miss Hollis, the Duke started. I came here to organize a library. That's all. Seren stood, her legs steady despite the trembling in her core. Whatever else has occurred was a mistake. My mistake. I apologize for any embarrassment I've caused the family. Seren, I'll arrange transport back to London today. She looked at the Dowager, deliberately avoiding the Duke's eyes. The catalogue is nearly complete. Notes are in my quarters. A professional can finish the remaining work easily. She walked out of the morning room with her head high, her posture perfect, and her heart breaking with every step. She was packed within 2 hours. Alice helped her, tearful and protesting, but Seren moved mechanically through the process, folding dresses, organizing papers, leaving behind every gift Theron had given her, except the Book of Myths with its faded inscription, that she couldn't bear to leave. The Duke came to her rooms just as she was closing her final trunk. She heard his footsteps in the corridor, heard him stop at her door. Seren, please. She didn't turn around. The carriage is waiting, Your Grace. Don't do this. Don't let them win. They already won. She finally faced him, letting him see the tears she could no longer contain. They won years ago, when they built a world where people like me are problems to be managed, and people like you are prizes to be claimed. I forgot that for a moment. You helped me forget. But forgetting doesn't change reality. I'll change reality. You can't. She picked up her small bag, the one containing the myth book and her mother's locket, and the few possessions that truly belonged to her. You have obligations, people who depend on you. I won't be the reason you abandon them. And if I want to abandon them, then you're not the man I fell in love with. She moved toward the door, toward him. The man I love takes his responsibilities seriously. He protects the people who depend on him. He would never sacrifice 12,000 livelihoods for one bookseller's niece. Seren, goodbye, Theron. She walked past him without looking back, down the corridors, down the stairs, through the great hall where she'd first entered this world that was never truly hers. The carriage waited in the courtyard. She climbed inside without assistance. As the wheels began to turn, she allowed herself one glance back at Ashford Hall. A figure stood at an upper window, watching her leave. She turned away and didn't look again. London in winter was gray and cold, and exactly as she'd left it. The bookshop looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier, its windows clouded with grime that nobody had cleaned in her absence. Her uncle embraced her tearfully, asking no questions about why she'd returned early. She told him the work was complete, a lie, and that she'd missed home, another lie, and he accepted both with the weary gratitude of someone too tired to probe deeper. The days blurred together. She helped with customers, organized shelves that didn't need organizing, read books she couldn't concentrate on. At night, she lay awake thinking of Moorland and libraries and a duke who'd looked at her like she mattered. On the 5th day, Silas Denton appeared. He was a man of middling years, with sharp eyes and a sharper smile, the kind of person who made a living finding things, and people, that preferred not to be found. Seren had heard of him through various London connections, though their paths had never crossed directly. "Miss Hollis, you're a difficult woman to track." "Mr. Denton, I wasn't aware anyone was tracking me." "His Grace, the Duke of Northmere, is tracking you. Or rather, he hired me to track you, which amounts to the same thing." Denton produced a letter from his coat. "He wants you to return to Ashford Hall." Seren's heart lurched despite her best efforts. "No." He was quite insistent, also quite generous in his payment. Denton examined the letter. "Says here he's called off discussions with the Whitmore family. Told Lady Elspeth personally that he has no interest in an arrangement. Caused quite the scandal, apparently. That has nothing to do with me. He seems to think it has everything to do with you." Denton set the letter on the counter. "Look, Miss Hollis, I normally don't involve myself in romantic entanglements. Too messy. But this Duke is offering me an obscene amount of money to deliver you, and an even more obscene amount if I deliver you willing. So perhaps just read the letter?" Serene stared at the paper like it might catch fire. "He also said," Denton continued, "that if you refuse to return, he'll come here himself. And he seemed to mean it. He can't come here. The Duke of Northmere can't just appear in a London bookshop. That's more or less what I told him. He didn't seem concerned." Denton headed for the door. "The letter explains more than I can. I'll be at the coaching inn on the corner until tomorrow morning. If you decide to return, find me there." He left. Seren stared at the letter for a long moment, then picked it up with trembling hands. "My dearest Seren, I've written this letter 17 times. Every version sounds either too formal or too desperate, and I cannot seem to find the words that fall between. You were wrong to leave. I was wrong to hesitate. My grandmother was wrong to threaten you, and the Whitmores were wrong to attack you. Everyone in that room was wrong except you, and you were only wrong in believing that leaving would solve anything. It solved nothing. The library remains half organized. The house remains empty of anything that matters. And I remain exactly what I was before I met you. A man performing the role of Duke without actually living. You accused me of being unable to sacrifice for the people who depend on me. But you are one of those people now. You became one of those people the moment you told me I was wrong about Montaigne. I have a responsibility to you, to us, that supersedes obligations to families who would use their influence to destroy happiness in the name of propriety. I have ended all discussions with the Whitmores. I have informed my grandmother that I will not be pressured into any arrangement she devises. I have made clear, to everyone who will listen, that my choices are my own. The only choice remaining is yours. Come back to me. Not as a librarian or a guest or an arrangement, but as yourself, as Seren, as the woman I love. If you refuse, I will come to London. I will stand in your uncle's shop and declare my feelings before every customer who enters. I will cause exactly the scandal my grandmother fears, because scandals only have power when we grant it to them. But I would rather not cause a scandal. I would rather simply have you home. Please come home. Yours, in every way that matters. Theron Seren read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down on the stool behind the counter and wept. Her uncle found her there, tears streaming down her face, the letter clutched to her chest. Child, he settled beside her with the creaking slowness of age. What's happened? He wants me to come back. The Duke? Yes. Her uncle was quiet for a moment. And what do you want? I want. She couldn't finish the sentence. Wanting felt dangerous. Wanting had led her here, to this cold shop with a broken heart, and a letter that promised everything. When your father died, her uncle said slowly, your mother told me something I've never forgotten. She said the tragedy wasn't that she'd lost him. The tragedy would have been if she'd never had him at all. That's different. They were married. They belonged to the same world. Your father was a scholar who became a shopkeeper. Your mother was a merchant's daughter who dreamed of being a poet. They belonged to each other, and that was enough. He took her hand, his grip warm despite his years. Go back to him, Seren, or don't. But make the choice because it's what you want, not because you're afraid. Seren looked at the letter, at her uncle, at the gray walls of the shop that had sheltered her for 7 years. Then she went to find Silas Denton. The journey back to Northumberland felt different than the first time. Shorter, somehow, despite the same grueling 4 days of travel. Perhaps because she spent every mile rehearsing what she would say, what she would do, how she would face the Dowager and the Whitmores and everyone else who believed she didn't belong. When the carriage finally crested the hill overlooking Ashford Hall, Seren's breath caught exactly as it had the first time. Home, she thought, and was surprised to realize she meant it. The Duke was waiting in the courtyard when she arrived. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, jaw unshaven, clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. But his face, when he saw her step down from the carriage, was incandescent with relief. You came. You threatened to cause a scandal in my uncle's shop. I couldn't allow that. He laughed, a raw sound, and pulled her into an embrace so fierce it drove the breath from her lungs. I meant every word, he murmured against her hair. I would have done it. I know. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. That's partly why I came, to spare London the spectacle. Only partly? The other part is more complicated. Tell me anyway. She took a breath. I love you. I've loved you since you told me the library was organized incorrectly, and I told you that you were wrong. I left because I thought loving you would destroy you. I came back because not loving you would destroy me. He kissed her then, in full view of whatever servants were watching, with a desperation that suggested he'd been holding his breath for days. When they finally separated, Seren became aware of movement near the main entrance. The Dowager stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I suppose, the older woman said, you'd better come inside. We have matters to discuss. The conversation that followed took place in the same morning room where everything had fallen apart. But this time, Theron sat beside Seren, his hand clasped firmly in hers, presenting a united front. The Dowager examined them both for a long moment. Lady Whitmore is furious, she said finally. Lady Elspeth has taken to her bed with a nervous complaint. The entire county is buzzing with speculation about the Duke, who dismissed a perfectly suitable match in favor of a bookseller's niece. Grandmother, I'm not finished. The Dowager's voice softened slightly. I was wrong, Theron. I pushed too hard, worried too much about appearances, forgot that your happiness matters more than society's approval. Seren blinked, certain she'd misheard. Your father married for love, the Dowager continued. I opposed that match too, if you'll recall. And I was wrong then as well. He was happy. Truly happy. That should have been enough for me. You opposed Mother? Vigorously. She had neither fortune nor connections, but she had something more valuable. She saw your father as a man rather than a title. She made him laugh in ways I hadn't heard since he was a child. The dowager's eyes glistened briefly before she blinked the moisture away. Miss Hollis does the same for you. Even I can see that. Then you approve? The hope in Theron's voice made Serene's chest ache. I accept. The dowager's smile was wry. Approval may take longer, but I won't stand in your way. If this is what you want, truly want, then I'll support it publicly. Thank you, grandmother. Don't thank me yet. There's still the matter of managing the scandal. We'll need to craft the narrative carefully. The romantic angle might work. The Duke saved the impoverished gentlewoman, that sort of thing. We'll emphasize Miss Hollis's education and accomplishments. Perhaps commission a portrait. She continued planning, her practical mind already working through logistics. Seren caught Tansy peeking through the doorway, grinning triumphantly. This wasn't the fairy tale ending. Not yet. There would still be whispers, still be people who disapproved, and still be moments when she wondered if she truly belonged. But sitting beside Theron, her hand warm in his, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. The announcement was made 3 weeks later, at a ball the Dowager hosted specifically for the purpose. Every family of consequence in Northumberland attended, driven as much by curiosity as courtesy. Seren wore a gown of deep crimson silk, chosen by Tansy and approved by the Dowager herself. Gold thread embroidered the bodice in patterns that caught the candlelight. Her mother's locket hung at her throat, the only jewelry she truly owned. The Duke led her to the center of the ballroom, exactly as he had at the Winterbourne Assembly. But this time, instead of a waltz, he turned to address the assembled guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried across the sudden silence. "Thank you for joining us this evening. My grandmother has graciously organized this gathering so that I might make an announcement." Seren felt every eye in the room fix upon her. Lady Whitmore stood near the refreshment tables, her expression sour. Lady Elspeth was notably absent. 6 months ago, I met a woman in a bookshop. She told me I was wrong about organizational systems. She implied my opinions about Montaigne were nonsense. She treated me like a man rather than a title, which was so unusual I didn't quite know how to respond. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. I brought her to Ashford Hall to organize my father's library, a task I couldn't face myself. What I didn't expect was that she would organize something far more important. My heart. Serene's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Miss Seren Hollis has agreed to become my wife." Theron turned to face her, his gray eyes bright with emotion. "She has made me braver than I knew I could be. She has reminded me that love is worth any scandal, any whisper, and any obstacle society cares to place in our path. And she has taught me that the best things in life often begin with being told you're wrong." He dropped to one knee in front of 300 witnesses. "Seren, I asked you once in private, but I want the world to hear me ask again. Will you marry me?" The room held its breath. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, despite the tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. 1,000 times, yes." He rose and kissed her, right there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of everyone. It was scandalous and perfect and absolutely inappropriate. The applause that followed was not universal. Serene caught Lady Whitmore's visible displeasure, but it was genuine from those who mattered. Tansy was crying openly. The Dowager was not crying, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. And Theron was smiling, really smiling, in a way that transformed his severe features into something beautiful. 1 year later, the library of Ashford Hall was finally, completely organized. Seren stood in its center, turning slowly to admire her work. 12,000 volumes arranged by subject, then by author, each section clearly labeled. The astronomical texts near the tall windows where the light was best. The philosophy section expanded to include new acquisitions. The mythology books, including Theron's childhood favorite, given a place of honor near the reading chairs. She was examining a new shipment of natural history texts when the connecting door opened and her husband entered. "There you are." Theron crossed to where she stood, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I've been looking everywhere." "I've been here, as usual." She leaned back against his chest. "The Havershams sent their new catalog. I think we should acquire the botanical illustrations. Whatever you want." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I have news. Good or bad?" "Good, I think. Tansy's engagement has been announced." Seren turned in his arms, eyebrows rising. "To whom?" "Lord Pemberton. Apparently they've been corresponding secretly for months. My grandmother is beside herself with approval for once. That's wonderful. Tansy must be thrilled. She's already planning the wedding." He pulled her closer. "I told her she could have whatever she wanted as long as she doesn't ask me to make a speech." "You made a perfectly good speech at our wedding." "Our wedding was different. Our wedding was about us." They stood together in the library, surrounded by books and memory and the particular warmth of a room well loved. Through the windows, Seren could see the moorland stretching toward the horizon, wild and beautiful. She thought of the bookshop in London, still operating under her uncle's care with new assistants to help. She thought of the green guest suite that had become their private chambers after the wedding. She thought of all the letters she'd received, from friends and strangers who'd read about the Duke and the bookseller's niece and wanted to offer congratulations. "I love you," she said, the words worn comfortable with repetition, but no less true. "I love you too." Theron's arms tightened around her. "You know, I never did find a copy of that Montaigne translation." "The 1811 edition? I have 3 copies now. One of the benefits of marrying into a library. And here, I thought you married me for my charming personality." "That too." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "Though mostly for the books." His laughter echoed through the library, warm and unguarded and real. Outside, the Northumberland wind swept across the moors, carrying the season's first hints of spring. Inside, the Duke and Duchess of Northmere stood among their books, exactly where they belonged. And in the years that followed, whenever anyone asked how they met, Seren would smile and say, "I told him he was wrong about organizational systems. He decided that was worth investigating further." It was perhaps not the most romantic origin story, but it was theirs, and that was enough.